Now, tell us what the latest discussions have been at the summit.
Well, at the moment, they've been focusing on Ukraine and migration, so two quite complicated issues for EU leaders. We've heard from some of the heads of state and government that they want a strong returns policy. That's to say, those whose applications for asylum have been rejected, that they must be sent back to the country of origin in a more timely way. And that's something that was mentioned by the Belgian Prime Minister, because, of course, the terrorist attack on the attack on Belgian soil that killed two Swedish tourists, that's very much on the Belgian political agenda. Sweden and Belgium are among countries that want a stronger language on returns as part of a discussion on terrorism here at the EU summit. I've also heard from one source, from one of the delegations, that Giorgia Meloni, the Italian leader, wants to add language to the draft summit text on migration, but I haven't been able to confirm that with other diplomatic sources here. So we'll have to see what comes out of that, if anything. On Ukraine, also the same source that I was talking to was saying that she seemed confident that the newly appointed Slovak Prime Minister, who made his debut here as Prime Minister at this UCO, Robert Fico, who's breaking with Slovakia's tradition of supporting Ukraine militarily. He says there will not be any more military aid for Ukraine, but this source that I was speaking to said that he seemed actually quite pragmatic in the room when it comes to the question of financial and economic support for Ukraine. So he may be talking a tougher language to his voters at home or to the Slovak parliament, but once inside the room with other EU leaders, he appears to be, according to this one source, to be on board for some sort of financial support for Ukraine going forward. But again, we'll have to see what comes out of the final summit text on Ukraine.
Right, Armen, Georgian, the summit also focused on, of course, the other major news story, which is the ongoing war in Israel-Gaza.
Yeah, and it took 5 hours of discussions to finally get a text agreed. So this was the big sticking point in the summit. In the end, what they came up with was a compromise language that calls for humanitarian corridors and pauses, so stopping well short of those calls for a ceasefire that some countries such as Spain and Pedro Sanchez, whose country holds the rotating presidency of the EU, wanted. So a much more, from his perspective, modest language in the end, but clearly that conclusion from last night's talks has not completely put the lid on these very different positions that some of the EU member states have, some that are more ostensibly pro-Palestinian, others that put the emphasis on Israel's right to self-defense. And we heard this morning, coming into the summit, Leo Varadkar, the Irish leader, still calling for a peace summit. So he was putting the emphasis on the need for some kind of diplomatic process to get a two-state solution idea back on track again. But I have to say that was not the main thrust of the summit conclusions last night on the Middle East. They talked first of all about supporting Israel, condemning Hamas once again, and thirdly, these humanitarian corridors and pauses. And only fourthly, much further down in the summit conclusions, they talk about the peace day efforts and the two-state solution. So I think it's fair to say that that is not on top of the EU's list of priorities right now if you look at the collective EU position, Shona.
Armen, Georgian, thank you so much for joining us live.